Hello, and welcome back to another devlog for my game, Project Zero. A simple block puzzle game that I'm making as a way to sort of test myself as a game dev, figure out all the kinks in my workflow with the intention of, eventually moving on to making more complicated games. Now, I'm super excited to be back because it's actually been about 4 months since the last devlog. Unfortunately, right after filming the last devlog, I got laid off, and so all of my focus shifted from, this project to finding a new job. Luckily, I did find a new job. I'm sure you were very worried, but it did have the side effect of really tanking my motivation, and somehow 4 months went by. I'm not super happy about it, but I definitely learned the lesson the hard way of how easy it is to sort of lose focus and lose motivation. Yeah. Now, during this 4-month break that I took, while I wasn't working on the game, I was thinking a lot about the game, and I always wanted to get back to it. And I did realize a couple of things. First was that my game is ugly. If you remember from the last devlog, it works, but there's no assets, there's nothing. It doesn't look good. And I think that is one of the things that was kind of contributing to my lack of motivation, was that I found it hard to see how this game could be good when it was so bad to look at. So what I ended up doing was just going to the Unity asset store, finding some free assets that fit the sci-fi theme that I was going for, and then bringing them into my project and applying to them, and applying the assets. And once I actually found the assets that I wanted, applying them was a relatively easy thing to do. And I found it made a pretty big difference in the game. I just added a couple of metallic assets to my tiles, added a skybox, and all of a sudden things are looking a lot better. Now, I'm not sure that these are the assets that I'm actually going to stick with, and I'm not even sure that this space theme kind of makes sense for the game, but for now, given that we're still early stages in this project, I think that having these in there is really going to help me keep my motivation up and just make the game nicer to look at as I'm working on it. The other thing that I realized during my 4-month sabbatical, we'll call it, is that this is a very simple game, right? Probably too simple to be released on Steam, but I think maybe it could find a place as a mobile game. Now, I think the first step in making this a mobile game is just flipping the aspect ratio, which is pretty easy to do. But then more of the bulk of the work, I think, is going to be figuring out touch controls and figuring out how to actually build on mobile. So anyway, that's what I'm going to get up to, and I'll check back in when I'm done. And we're back. It's a couple of days later, and I think I finally cracked touch inputs. So I'm ready to show off what I've done. The first thing I had to do, pretty easy, was just set up a new action map, one that was specifically looking for these 2 touch inputs. And then really the bulk of the work that I had to do was updating my player movement script to now work with these new inputs. So what I've done is I actually changed kind of fundamentally how I was working with the input system. So now what I've done is I've defined all of these different actions, and now it's a bit of a long list because I've left the keyboard inputs in there as well, just to help with my local testing. But basically, at the start of the game, or the start of the level, in the awake function, we've got basically finding all of the actions, and then the kind of the big difference here now is that I'm setting up I'm subscribing events to these actions in the onEnable method. So I don't fully understand this bit myself, but as I understand it, each of these touch actions has 3 different states. It's got performed, started, and canceled, which are exactly what they sound like. And what you can do is you can subscribe certain methods to them so that when a certain move up is performed, for example, it fires the move up method that I've written down below. And really that's kind of the main difference in how this is working. So as you can see, for the touch inputs, I've got when the touch press starts and when the touch press ends. I've got 2 different methods. And so the way that this works basically is, when you start a touch, it just records the position and the time. But when you end the touch, now that's really where the bulk of this is happening. So, if we find the end position, calculate the distances that the swipe has moved after a couple of just checks to make sure it wasn't like an invalid touch. And then basically take a look and see, okay, well, what was the largest axis that you moved on? And then use the same process inputs function that I've been using for my normal player movement to trigger one of those based on the direction of the swipe. So pretty simple now that I know what I'm doing, but this definitely took a little while to get the hang of. And there was one thing that I really took a while, which was this input debugger. in order to get my inputs working, I had to go find this little option called Simulate Touch Input from Mouse or Pen. And wow, this made a huge difference in being able to test locally. And so what I can do now is I can go back to my level, I can hit play, and now as you can see, when I swipe my mouse, it moves. And look at that. Touch inputs. Now, I think to be sure this is actually working and not just simulated working, I'm gonna eventually have to test on a real mobile device, but I'm actually gonna save that for a bit later because something else came up while I was working on this that I think is more pressing. I realized as I was going through and changing the inputs from keyboard to mouse in every single level that this was really annoying. And I think that as the game gets bigger and has potentially hundreds of levels, this is just gonna go from unsustainable, unrealistic, impossible to manage, and I think I need to do something about it now. So what I want to do is kind of go back to the drawing board and sort of rethink, re-architect really like how I built this game from the ground up, and I want to do it now before it becomes an even bigger problem than it already is. But that's going to be a big undertaking, and as you can probably tell, it's getting a little bit late. So I think I'm just going to call it here for the night, take the win with touch inputs, and then pick this back up on the weekend. I'll check in with you then. Well, the weekend didn't happen, but it's Monday night now and I'm ready to get back at it. I've been thinking a lot about the problem that I'm facing, and I think I'm coming up with an okay solution. Basically what's going on is that at the moment I've got 5 scenes and 5 levels in my game, which is fine for a prototype, but as that number starts to grow, become 6, 7, 10 levels, it's gonna start to get annoying whenever I need to make changes to the individual level structure. For example, if I wanna add a sound manager to play music, I'm gonna have to go through each of these levels individually and add that component. Now, with 10 levels, not such a big deal, but as that number continues to grow up to 15, 50, 100, 1,000, etc. levels, it's just gonna become unsustainable and it's not gonna work. So I need to do something about it. And what I've come up with is to basically scrap this idea of one level per scene and move to a situation where I just have 2 scenes in my game. I've got a level maker and a level loader. The level maker is going to be basically an internal tool that I'm using to actually prototype, build, and eventually save the configuration of the various levels. And it's not actually going to even be in the final build. Now, the level loader is going to be basically a lighter weight version of that just loads the levels for the user to play. And basically, I think the final game is going to come down to just 1, maybe 2 scenes once I add some menus in there. I think this is a much better way to architect the game, but so far it's just an idea. So let's get building and we'll see how it shakes out. Hello and welcome back. It is now Wednesday and I've made a decent amount of progress. I think I'm about halfway through the goal that I set for myself and I'm ready to show off a little bit. So what I've done in a nutshell is I've built this level saver script. And there's a bunch of stuff that goes into it that I want to run through. So first and foremost are these 2 buttons here, the save and the load level button. Not looking at this code at the bottom of the screen here, nothing too crazy now that I know how to do it, but figuring out how to add my own buttons to the inspector was a really fun, cool process. And I'm actually pretty happy with how they turned out, even though it's basically the simplest implementation possible, just to save and a load level button. But what these buttons do for me is actually kind of huge. Basically what happens is clicking either one of them will just trigger the corresponding piece of code where you can save or load the level. So the save level function, basically what this does is it loops through the environment game object as well as the player and basically just saves all that to a file. So what I can do is I can just hit save level and it'll save this level configuration. If I now take a look at my file browser, I see I've got square1.save, and as you can see, I've got basically this JSON file that just has the position and the rotation of all the objects in my scene. Super cool. I went ahead and just for demonstration's sake, made a few more levels. So let me just load up square2. As you can see, it completely changes the level configuration. Pretty happy with this. It's exactly what I was kind of hoping to accomplish, and I think it sets me up well to kind of make a lot of levels in a more sustainable way. Now I just have to figure out how to change the rest of my game so that it works as a single scene game and it runs something similar to this load level function every time player completes a level, but that's a problem for another night. Welcome back. It's been a few days, maybe a week since I've checked in, but it is a cold winter's night here in January, and what a better way to pass the time than working on your game. There's been a few updates since I last checked in. I ended up getting the game working as I wanted to, but it got a little bit more complicated than I was expecting. I've got, I think, 4 or 5 scripts now running, all kind of controlled by this IO manager that I created. And of course, there were a bunch of hiccups along the way. Turns out I was saving my files to the wrong place, so when I tried to build the game couldn't find them. Turns out I was saving prefabs the wrong way, because it turns out you can't just save a prefab, so I had to implement a script that just holds references to all my prefabs based on a tag. And I ended up implementing a little bit of UI just as an end of level flow, because I got tired of my levels just automatically loading the next one, especially when I was trying to debug what was going wrong. So yeah, so that exists, and as always, it's kind of ugly, but it's on the list of things to improve eventually. Now, it's been a busy month getting all this done. Definitely a bit ambitious, but I'm glad I pushed through and made this change to the game. I think it's going to be a lot better moving forward. But the last thing I have to do is figure out how to build this game on mobile so I can kind of call it a successful month. So that's what I'm going to get up to today, and hopefully it's easy. We'll see. So that actually ended up being pretty easy. I ended up following someone else's YouTube tutorial, which I'll put a link to in the description. And I'm not going to show it here because it was basically just change a bunch of settings, install a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I managed to build the game on my phone, and it's not the easiest thing to show, but as you can see, I've got the game running on mobile. I can swipe and everything's working as expected. Feels almost like a bit of an anticlimactic end to the month, because it actually didn't take me very long to do this at all. But I think it's a nice way to wrap up. Now I've got the game on my phone, I can start showing it to people. When I tell them what I'm doing in my spare time, I actually have a little bit of proof. So as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.